Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
The Other Universal Studios Tour by M. Leonard. My first official day on the job at Universal Studios Hollywood sucked. I mean, really sucked. Between transversing the employee parking structure and changing into the goofy uniform, once I reached my station, it already felt like an 8-hour day. And the place was packed. I couldn't have started on a more busy day. But they do this on purpose. You either survive the first day of summer madness, or you quit. It was going to be your first day, or your last. And what a day it is. You pretty much experience everything that could ever happen on this first day. At the end of it, you'll know if theme park ride operation is for you. I thought about this as I set up hazard cones around a large pile of puke and waited for the maintenance guy. The stench intensified as it cooked under the sweltering Los Angeles summer sun. The demented aroma hinted at some kid who had eaten too many of Harry Potter's chocolate frogs. Once maintenance finally showed up, the barf had transformed into a thick gelatin, spread like spackle over the concrete. The maintenance man examined it for a minute before speaking. "First day?" he asked with a smile while sprinkling a soaking solution over the vomit. I wasn't exactly in the talking mood, but nodded in the affirmative. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he asked. He was an elderly man with really bad posture. He moved so slow and frail, I had a hard time believing Universal would employ him. But in his own slow motion, he managed to clean up the mess. His full-bodied and slick back hair was like something right out of an old 50s television show. It was perfectly coiffed, jet black, and didn't match the rest of his appearance. I thought it was part of the Universal Studio shtick, like a struggling actor/janitor character. "The name's Jack," he added in an almost put-on bad guy in the movies accent. We had a brief exchange that became more odd as the conversation went on. Jack spoke as if prepping me for this first day. He kept calling it the tour. Things like, "Watch out for this," and "Look out for that." "And whatever you do, never, ever take anything from the studio home with you," he finally added, and with the most emphasis. I left him there, mopping up barf and not wanting to engage in any more conversation with some goofball wannabe old man actor who was just adding more to the stress of this first day. Upon returning to my station at Jurassic Park, to which I was an attendant, I noticed that things had become chaotic. Something was happening. The ride had stopped. My supervisor appeared in a huff, asking me where I'd been. "We have a code 7, he exclaimed, directing me towards the trouble. I was headed to the first climactic section of the ride, when the boat made its curve towards the final drop just as the fake T-Rex lunges out. To my surprise, once I arrived, just a single guest was still in the boat. A young woman. The only sound was a low, constant murmur of water blockage somewhere deeper down the track. The boat was lodged up from the canal and sat slightly lopsided. There were remnants of a scuffle within the seats. Torn jackets, empty shoes, and other personal belongings were scattered about. The woman stared forward, sitting silent and still. I could see in her eyes a paralyzing fear. What the hell happened here? Tied my safety rope to the back cleat of the boat to secure it. Breaking her gaze, she spun her head towards me. "Don't move," she spilled out in a harsh, desperate whisper. I froze. Her sudden words took me by surprise. With her eyes, she motioned for me to look further down the track canal. A group of Universal Studio employees were on their knees, chomping down on whatever was left of the other guests. Thick red blood squirted out from their desperate chomps as they fed like wild coyotes. I quickly realized the low murmur of water blockage was actually flesh and bone being eviscerated by this ravenous horde. The rational me thought maybe this was part of some advertising campaign for a new horror night, and that I was the butt of the joke. I'll just go along with the gag, I figured. Despite having theme park attractions, this was a movie studio after all. I extended my hand to help the woman out of her seat, playing into the scene a little bit, assuming I was on camera. She pointed to her lap bar, which was holding her in place. I silently inched my way towards the step release on the backside corner, like in the movies. I set my foot on the release and stepped down. The lap bars in the boat shot forward with a loud snap. They were on us with lightning speed, already digging into the young woman's neck as she screamed out in horror. And then they noticed me. Quickly flanking my only possible exit, I was surrounded. Glowing milk-white eyes stared at me as dark red blood ran down from their faces and onto ripped-up uniforms. I recognized one of them. It was Mike, a guy from my new hire orientation. I knew this had to be a skit. Like zombie employees attacking guests to plug the upcoming Horror Nights events. I did my best at playing the part, acting scared, yet doing a proper action stance. A bullet whizzed by my head, blowing the side of Mike's face off. 4 ropes suddenly dropped from above, followed by heavily armored soldiers sliding down them. They racked off precision shots, dropping the hideous group one by one. Silence fell over the scene. The lead soldier spoke into the radio attached to his shoulder. He had a large number 3 on the upper left of his uniform. "Quadrant D, Scene 7. Subject located. Over." He approached as the other soldiers began frisking me. "He's clean," one of them said. Number 3 got in close. We were face to face, his helmet and face mask a mere inches away. I could see deep within the black of his helmet what looked like television static. The white snow seemed to move in unison as he spoke. "You're in violation of Code 7, the voice squeaked out from behind his mask. I slyly asked about Code 7, thinking this was still a hoax. Before I could get an answer, Mike began to stir from his position on the ground. His fellow horde also showed slow movement. Number 3 grabbed me into some nearby cover. He watched as the hideous group came back to life and went back to chewing on the bloody heap down the track. Number 3 spoke out from behind his helmet mask. "Stolen goods." It appeared as Code 7 was when a new employee takes something home from the studio archives. Now the shtick was getting old. I'd had enough of doing my best at acting the part. I made my feelings known to Number 3 with a stern frankness in my question about this stolen goods. "During orientation, you accepted a sock. That sock belonged to the studio wardrobe historic archives." "Are you kidding me? A freaking sock?" I demanded a cut in the action. I was done being part of this ridiculous script. But Number 3 grabbed my wrist and strapped on an expensive-looking watch. It seemed to wrap tightly and form to the contours of my bone structure. There was no way of getting this thing off. "You have exactly 45 days to return our property," his voice squeaked out again from behind his mask. I examined the watch closely. Its hands clicked away each passing second, as spinning elaborate gears danced behind them. In its center was a day counter. And number 1 displayed. This was day 1. "What happens at 45? I asked. Before I knew it, I was alone, hiding behind the cover of the attraction scenery. Number 3 and his team were gone, vanished. I crouched there alone, spying Mike and the crew munching on Flesh Heap. What was happening? Is this for real? I'd heard some crazy stories about working here, about the sets being haunted, employees telling tales about ghosts of wannabe actors blending in with the crowd. Could these stories be true? But it was hard doing so as I watched my fellow park employee Mike chow down on a torso like it was his last meal. I sat hidden among the sound of consumed flesh and the ticking of a wristwatch, turning my thoughts towards this stolen sock. Then it occurred to me. The sock. It was Mike who gave it to me. Said he got it from a guy who worked in the wardrobe building. A janitor. I remember it. An ugly old Argyle pattern sock. He said it belonged to Boris Karloff. Back when they filmed Frankenstein, here at the studio. I thought he was full of shit, but I brought it home to my girlfriend anyway. Thought she'd get a kick out of it. That I already had a piece of movie history on day 1 of orientation. What a dumbass I was. Glancing down to the watch, the day's counter displayed the number 11, as if shouting it into my face. Had I been sitting there thinking about all of this for 11 days? I had to move, but to where? I scanned the space, and behind me was a door that read, "Emergency exit." Funny thing, I didn't recall there being a door there, ever. Maybe that's where number 3 and his team escaped to. I moved quietly from my hiding spot, pushed softly on the door latch, and slipped through. I found myself in a long and dimly lit corridor that extended as far as I could see. It seemed endless. Walking forward, I tried to picture where in the park I was. During orientation, we were provided a detailed diagram of exits, service routes, and even escape routes. There was no mention of this route. It wasn't long before realizing my walking efforts were futile, and I was getting nowhere. It was the same dimly lit corridor that went on and on with each and every step. I decided to turn back to the emergency exit. Again, the same nothing as my walk became a steady stride. It was when I looked at my watch and saw the number 15 that I began to run. After a few hundred yards, I stopped to catch my breath. The corridor seemed to extend forever in both directions. Its walls were devoid of anything, and the ceiling had fluorescent tubes embedded every 50 feet or so, lighting the way. Panic set in. I'm trapped. To make matters worse, the day's indicator now displayed 18. Time was moving even faster, it seemed. Just when I started to give up hope, I noticed a marking on the floor. I had spent so much time moving forward into the endless hallway that I didn't bother to look down to the large arrow painted on the ground. It was pointing in the opposite direction to which I was headed. I turned around and began walking. After 100 yards or so, I came to another arrow that pointed in the opposite direction. So I turned. After 50 feet, another arrow, and so on. I would follow these painted arrows on the ground, with each time the distance getting shorter and shorter. Soon it was mere steps before I'd turn around and head into the opposite direction. You could imagine how shocked I was once I turned around a final time and found myself at the end of a long line of people. "You're in the wrong line, dude," said the stoner-looking guy in front of me. His lengthy, dirty blonde hair shagged over his droopy eyes. Beyond him, the other 50 or so people in line were all looking back at me. I was suddenly the center of their attention. Each face that stared at me looked vastly different from the next, like characters in movies. The woman in front of the stoner guy moved in close and pulled up my hand to look at my watch. She had disheveled and dirty clothes. Her face was littered with grease stains. A small gash on her forehead was dripping with congealed blood. "You still have a watch," she said sadly, as if speaking about a long-lost precious memory. I glanced to see if anyone wore the same watch as me. It was just a lump of flesh, outlining a watch that was once there but now part of their bodies. There was nothing but sad eyes. Before I could say anything, Number 3 was standing beside me. "You're in a restricted area. 4-day penalty." His voice squeaked out from behind his mask again. A collective gasp echoed through the corridor from the people waiting in line. "Follow me." I followed Number 3 away from the line of people. We walked for a short distance before turning into a connected corridor. I would never have noticed it was there. It blended in perfectly. We walked a few more yards before coming to a door. "You're at risk for permanent residency. Please provide a full recovery," he squeaked. A full recovery? What the freak is that? Before I could even ask, Number 3 shoved me out of the door and slammed it behind me. I tripped over myself and fell onto the ground. I sprung onto my feet back towards the door. It was gone, and in its place was a fake brick wall. I was in the middle of a sound stage set, and in no time at all, a bullet bounced by inches from my head. It took me a second to realize the full-scale battle happening on all sides. Gunfire and explosions with bodies flying into the air. Swarms of zombies feasting on small hills of dead flesh. Resistance-like fighters taking position and raining gunfire on nationalist-looking soldiers. It was the end of the world, and I was right smack in the middle of it. I bobbed and weaved my way through the carnage, looking for another exit door. It didn't take long before I caught the attention of Mike and his zombie horde. They began to ascend on me with a furious pace. I ran all out, looking for an escape as rounds of bullets whizzed by. Out of the corner of my eye was the large, monstrous stage door that was slowly closing. This was my exit, but I only had seconds. I ran all out and dove through. I landed hard on the ground as the giant door shut behind me with a thunderous echo. As the sound eventually faded and I regained some bearing, a few feet away was a bus stop. All was quiet, peaceful almost. Behind me was the giant sound stage door that seemed to extend forever on either side, and was so high I couldn't see the top. There was no getting around it. My only option was to move forward. I decided to take a seat at the bus stop, regroup, and rest. The number 32 brightly glowed from the wristwatch. It seemed to wrap even more tightly around my skin. 32 days had passed. I had 13 left until God knows what. All I knew was my fate rested with getting that stupid sock from my apartment and bringing it back to wardrobe archives. But how? It seemed all doors and every turn took me deeper into whatever madness this was. Just as this dilemma began to take over, and I'd given up hope, a bus arrived as if on cue. The doors swung open. Great. Another door, I thought. This place was full of doors. I wondered what was behind this one as I rose to my feet and reluctantly climbed aboard. I had no choice, really. This was my only way forward, and moving forward seemed to be the only options. Lots of seats in the back, the plain-looking bus driver said impatiently. I made my way towards the rear once the door shut and the bus started moving. As I got closer to the sole passenger aboard, I saw it was Jack, the maintenance man. He sat quietly as if finishing up a long day at work, jotting into a crossword puzzle. I took a seat a few spaces across. His tired eyes made their way towards me. "What the hell happened to you?" he snapped. As I began to fumble through my best explanation, he quickly interrupted. "I don't care about that. I'm talking about that," he said, pointing to the congealed blood and gore that had splattered on my uniform. I forgot that I was wearing part of Mike's face from number 3's rifle shot. I looked at myself, almost noticing this for the first time. I had no answer. "Yep, the other tour can be quite messy," he said, more casually. "The other tour?" I asked. "Yeah, the other tour, smart guy," he answered back, with that man-in-the-movie exaggeration. I could see from the windows we were headed outside the studio. The sky glowing a deep orange, everything was filtered in a haze, as if a large fire had just been extinguished. We exited the highway and drove into a deserted Los Angeles. I asked Jack about the other tour. "The one that's made for you," he replied, assuming I knew what he was talking about. We sat in silence as the bus casually made its way through a neighborhood. I thought about what he meant. The tour that's made for me. What could this mean? Before I could ask, the bus came to a stop in front of a plain-looking suburban house. "I always loved those old-fashioned talkies," Jack said as he gathered his lunch pail. He held it up to me. "Used to belong to John Wayne himself," he confessed. He began to exit the bus, but not before adding one last piece of advice. "Don't be stuck on the other tour like me. Get that sock back." The bus doors shut, and we drove away, just like in the movies. It didn't take long for the chaos to erupt. In no time at all, the bus accelerated, swerving through the streets as rogue-looking vehicles flanked us on both sides. Gunfire shattered the windows as I hit the deck in a near miss. The bus driver yelled out to me, "Your stop's coming up!" I scooted on my stomach towards the front as gunfire and explosions rocked us on all sides. I crouched low next to the driver, waiting for my drop-off, as he managed to dodge the carnage while firing off rounds with a handgun. "Get ready!" In the distance, I saw we were approaching my apartment. I got myself ready at the door. The bus screeched to a halt and the door opened. I flung myself out and made a beeline into the building. Gunfire and zombies were on me in no time. I made it inside, but just barely. The building was dark and dead. The only light was a deep orange haze peeking in through boarded-up windows. The doors were barricaded, and entire sections of the buildings blocked off completely. It looked as if a great battle had taken place. I crept into the stairwell, as the lack of power rendered the elevators inoperable. I climbed up several flights, stepping over debris and dead bodies, before arriving on the 4th. All the apartment doors on my floor were either boarded shut or blocked with barbed wire barricades, except for mine. It was perfectly normal and slightly ajar. I softly pushed it open and went in. Besides the thick layer of dust, everything was still exactly the same. It was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. I cautiously inspected the interior. It was all clear. I spied around my small space, trying to remember where I had stashed that sock. It's here that I glanced at myself in the mirror, not realizing how bad the bloody mess had stained my uniform. I decided to change, if nothing more than to feel clean again. I looked at my watch to the number 40. Shit, I had 5 days left. As I ripped apart my apartment, things began to make sense in a warped sort of way. Whatever this alternate reality was, reflects my taste in movies. Like Mike, I remember him telling me he loved zombie movies. Resident Evil, 28 Days Later, World War Z. He may forever being a living embodiment of those films. I loved action thrillers, apocalyptic epics, and Jurassic Park. It's no wonder I was being attacked at every turn. And Jack, I think he called them old-fashioned talkies. That's why his bus ride was so calm into that sleepy suburban neighborhood. Jack was there because of John Wayne's lunch pail. I was there because of a frickin' sock. A sock that Mike gave me. That's why he kept showing up with his horde. He's trying to get that sock back, too. It's like our fates were colliding, fighting to avoid a permanent residency. I tore into my apartment, harder, looking for that goddamn stupid sock. I knew it had to be there. And sure enough, it was, mixed in with my other socks, ironically. As soon as I stuffed it into my pocket, I found myself face to face with Mike. He stood there, with his half-blown-off head and face oozing blood onto the carpet. Behind him, hordes of zombies were piling onto top of each other, trying to get through the door. I backed up slowly before Mike lunged at me. I threw myself back, accidentally crashing out the window. I remember accepting my certain death as I fell for what seemed like forever. I plopped onto a large airbag. The building I descended from was so high I couldn't see the top. I glanced at my watch. It had already started to melt into my skin. A numbers counter glowed in the center. It was counting down. I had just seconds. I looked around in panic. It didn't take long to realize that I was back inside the studio. The wardrobe archives were just steps away from me. I scrambled up to the door, but a hand grabbed my ankle. Mike had a firm grip on me, his half-rotted head still gushing thick red gore. The seconds counted down. 5, 4. I kicked his half face as hard as I could. 3, 2. His grip came loose. 1. I jammed myself through the wardrobe archives door. 0. The door slammed behind me. I lay on the floor in dead silence. A bright 0 glowed in the center of my watch. I pulled the sock out of my pocket and tossed it on the pile of clothes. I did it, and in the nick of time, too. The question was, now what? The watch began to loosen enough for me to get it off. I massaged my wrist where a constant tightening death grip once was. I took a deep sigh of relief. I heard the sound of crunching wood and crumbling drywall before a large force pushed me to the ground. It felt like the entire building came crashing down on me. It was accompanied by a gigantic roar, the iconic war cry of the T-Rex. It examined me with its inquisitive eyes, deciding on the right moment to feast. As I lay there helpless, waiting to be consumed, a hail of gunfire rained down. Number 3 and team came to my rescue. Or so I thought. Number 3 pulled me back and into some cover as his team fought relentlessly against the giant beast, now with a small squad of raptors. He strapped on a new watch to my wrist. "You're in violation of Code 7. This is a second offense. You have 10 days for a full recovery." His voice squeaked from behind his helmet mask. Before I could even ask, he and his team escaped into the nearby brush, leaving me there to deal with the dino crisis. I stayed hidden in my cover as I watched the raptors and T-Rex slowly hunt. It was only a matter of time until they found me. I sat there paralyzed with fear. What could I possibly have taken home this time? I brought the sock back. It didn't make any sense. Oh, then it dawned on me. My Jurassic Park uniform. I changed out of it back at my apartment. Now here I am regaining my composure. My action mind is thrust into full throttle. I need to get my uniform back, and I only have 5 days to do it. I'm tired and afraid. I'm one man against an entire army. The odds are stacked against me, just like in the movies. So quoth this raven. Is it sad, my darlings, that this makes me want to go to Universal Studios? A big thank you to my Patreon supporters, Ermin Case and Darren and Jennifer Daw. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.